an intense firing line of questions. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the first edition of Canada World Youth Talks, a series of virtual discussions celebrating our 50th anniversary and discussing the future of international development. My name is Susan Handrigan, President and CEO of Canada World Youth, and tonight I will be moderating this session, The Return of the Alumni. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Bienvenue à la première édition de Jeunesse-Canada-Monde en parle. Une série de discussions virtuelles pour fêter notre 50e anniversaire ainsi le futur développement international. La discussion ce soir sera en anglais, mais il y a une option pour l'écouter en français. Simplement cliquez sur le globe en bas de votre écran. Ça fait marqué interprétation. Donc, je vais vous donner un peu de temps juste de trouver l'option. Néanmoins, les questions seront toujours disponibles dans n'importe quelle langue ou la langue de votre choix. Great. So I'm pleased to join you tonight from Tiohtià:ke on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka. Tiohtià:ke has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst many First Nations. We recognize and respect the Kanien'kehá:ka as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which we meet today. Before we get started, I'd like to share a little bit of the logistics and how this will work tonight. Essentially, we'll get to know our four distinguished guests a little bit better with 4 or 5 rounds of questions. And at the end of the evening, we'll have some time for the Q&A. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see question and answers with a little quotation box. And in that box, you can write the questions. And Julian will either ask those questions on your behalf at the end of the session, or if it fits within the section, he might pop on the screen and ask during the section. So we'll keep the guest on their toes. When you ask the question, please identify who you are, if you are an alumni, which program and year you come from, and who you're addressing the question to. And if there's nothing else, I think we'll get started with our formal introductions. So I have the privilege tonight of revisiting the past with 4 distinguished guests, four people that I have gotten to know at various points since my tenure as president and CEO, and that's been about 2 years right now. But I've known Canada World Youth for a very long time, probably not as long as the guests that are with me, because I was a participant in 1997. Tonight, I have Carolyn Whitby with me, and Carolyn is a manager of Income Security and Social Development Employment and Social Development Canada. She is an expert in public policy, having worked within the government and without. Before joining the ESDC, she was an executive director of Fair Trade Canada and former director of Enviro Center, an environmental sustainability organization. Welcome and thank you for being here, Carolyn.
Merci.
Ensuite, we have Chris Eaton. And Chris is the executive director of University Service Canada, World University Service Canada. Sorry, Chris. He's involved in gender equality work around the world, and he is the former CEO of the Aga Khan Foundation, Afghanistan, and a member of the Criterion Institute's Power for Policy Advisory Committee. Thank you for being here, Chris. We're happy to have you.
Great to be here.
Next, we have Ellie Vanderberg. Hi, Ellie.
Hi.
Ellie is the champion for Global Institute Development, having played leadership roles in the national, international, and multilateral global development organization, including, sorry, somebody said something? No? Okay. Including as VP of International and Canadian Programs of World Vision Canada. She has also served as Professor of Global Practice at the University of Toronto's Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. Welcome, Ellie. So happy to have you.
Thank you.
And last, but certainly not least, we have Mr. Paul Davidson, President and CEO of Universities Canada. In addition to increasing research and development fund, Mr. Davidson has achieved increased resources in campus internalization, increased attention to issues of access and success for Aboriginal students. Prior to his current position, he was the Executive Director of World University Service Canada, so a little something in common there, and the Association of Canadian Publishers. All of these four guests have a few things in common. One, they all currently reside in Ottawa. That's correct. Two, they're all alumni of Canada World Youth. And Chris and Carolyn are also a couple. And Ellie and Paul are a couple. And Ellie and Paul also met on a Canada World Youth Exchange program. So welcome, panelists. So since you've all been participants of the Canada World Youth Program, you know how this works when we all get together. When we start to get to know each other a little bit better, we don't want to go in heavy with some questions that make us uncomfortable, or we're not used to answering right away. So we're going to get started with something we call a little bit of an icebreaker. And since you're both couples, we're going to be inspired by the newlywed game. So before we met, I've asked you both, or all four of you, to prepare two pieces of paper, one with your name and one with the name of your partner. So we're going to do this. We'll start with, just because Chris and Carolyn happen to be on top of my screen. So we'll play the game first with Carolyn and Chris, and then we'll bring in Ellie and Paul. So if we can just, there we go. Perfect. So I'm going to ask you four questions. It's going to be really fun. If you're all right, this is going to be amazing. But if you get some wrong, this could also be, I don't know, you're in the same house, so you can you can work that out afterward. So
I'm so ready.
And you're only going to raise the right answer. Example, if I say, who likes cheese? And the answer is Carolyn, you both raise the name Carolyn.
That's easy.
Okay, are you ready?
You bet.
First question is, who approached who first? I love it. Next question, which is probably easier, who reads the most? Ooh.
I think we both read a fair bit.
That's great. Who cooks the most? Uh-oh, most is a Carol. Okay, next, who's the best speaker?
Definitely.
Oh,
Chris, you're trying to be diplomatic, but you know, it just doesn't ring true.
Sorry.
I thought it was very nice. I thought it was very nice. Thanks for playing this game. Now you're all warmed up. You're ready for some good questions. But before we start, we're going to bring in the second couple, Ellie and Paul.
Be careful, you two.
Are you ready?
Tough questions tonight.
Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. You have different questions, okay? It's not the same questions. Who socializes most with the neighbors?
Ah, that's clear.
All with little hearts all over it. That's great. Who makes the coffee?
Ooh, tough one. Let me explain. Ellie makes the cappuccino. I make dark roast drip coffee.
Who makes the better coffee?
Oh.
Who makes the better coffee? Oh, there you go. There's the right answer. Very nice. Who likes to travel the most? Not who travels the most, who likes to travel the most, Paul. Great, thank you. And then for the last question is, who approached who first? Very nice. That one's all on the same page. So are you warmed up?
For sure. Let's
Great.
go.
Julien, can we have all four participants? The first question is to be answered by all participants. So we're going to bring everyone in. And the question is, and I'm going to save Caroline for last because je vais demander à Caroline de répondre en français, s'il vous plaît, pour cette question. But everyone else can still come in, just Carolyn's going to respond last. So in a few words, can you tell us how participating in Canada World Youth at an early age has shaped the person that you are today? So Ellie, you happen to be just the only one on my screen right now, so I'll start with you.
Sure, that's a great question. For me, it's in the name Canada World Youth. As a kid of immigrants to Canada, it just broadened my understanding of Canada, Canadians, Canadian culture, Canadian music. So there's the Canada part of it. It also exposed me to the world. Ecuador was the country of my exchange, but it exposed me to global issues, another language, other cultures. So there's the world part of it. And then youth, I developed and built relationships that shaped and changed me for my life, including with my life partner, Paul Davidson, and shaped my identity as a global citizen, a life partner, a mother, a feminist, a professional in global development since I graduated from university, and working with NGOs, the academic sector, in government, and now with the multilateral. So shaped me in many, many ways.
Thank you. It's interesting how you use the name of Canada World Youth to associate how it brought you to where you are today. Thank you for sharing that. Since you used Paul as your life partner, why don't we bring Paul in to answer that question next?
Great, thanks, Susan, and good evening, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be with you. In thinking about this, the Canada World Youth experience fueled my curiosity, not only about the world, but also about Canada. The opportunity to live and work in a different part of Canada really opened my eyes to the diversity we have right here in this country. The other thing that the program did for me, both as a participant and then later as a group leader on the Ontario-Kenya exchange, was it made me more comfortable both across boundaries and across borders and boundaries of all kinds. We become flexible and adaptable people through programs like Canada World Youth. And finally, I'd say that the program helped me take risks, to try new things, to get outside of my comfort zone. And these are all attributes that have stayed with me over the, I would say 4 decades since the program.
Yeah, that one, you feel
It
that
is
one.
4 decades.
Great, thank you, Paul, for sharing that. Since we're saving Carolyn for last, I guess that means you're up next, Chris.
Thank you. Well, it similarly shaped my whole career and my desire to work on global development issues. It nudged me towards my program in university, where I met Ellie and Carolyn, and Paul subsequently, shaped the work that I did after university. And everything that I've done in my career subsequently all begins with Canada World Youth. I think the thing that was perhaps most important for me in terms of my participation in Canada World Youth was the initial kind of becoming familiar, developing the initial competencies around intercultural communication and working well with people from vastly different perspectives and backgrounds than myself. Something that has been, incredibly important for the work that we all do, but something that began for me on Canada World Youth. And then I guess the last 2 things I would say was I met Carolyn because she did Canada World Youth and went to the same university program that I went to. So that was a really important part of Canada World Youth for me, and that shared experience. But also something that we passed on to our son, who did Canada World Youth as well. So something that emanated through the 2 generations of our family.
That's great. I love the risk-taking aspect as well, and tying it back to how it developed your own family. So that's great. Caroline, j'ai demandé de répondre à la question en français.
Oui.
Et la question en français, est-ce que je peux Explique-nous comment ta participation au programme de Jeunesse Canada-Monde a formé la personne que tu es devenue aujourd'hui.
Oui. OK. Fait que, évidemment, je suis bien contente d'être ici ce soir. Puis mes réponses sont pas mal semblables aux autres, mais en tout cas, pour moi, c'est sûr que j'ai fait le programme à 17 ans. Donc, quand à cet âge-là, un des aspects vraiment importants du programme, ça a été d'apprendre à me connaître moi-même. Puis je pense que quand on est exposé à un environnement différent, à différentes cultures, différents points de vue, puis là, je parle non seulement évidemment de la partie internationale de l'échange qui était au Sri Lanka pour moi, mais aussi de la partie interprovinciale qui était en Ontario rural, que ça m'a vraiment donné un petit coup. J'ai pris du recul par rapport à ma propre culture. Je n'avais pas été exposée à beaucoup de diversité en grandissant. Et puis, j'ai développé un sens critique puis une meilleure conscience sociale. Mais ça m'a aussi aidé à articuler mes propres valeurs. Puis, comme Chris, ça m'a orientée dans ma carrière. Et puis, c'est ça. Mais l'aspect final, je pense que c'est à une époque, c'est-à-dire dans les années 80, où moi, en tout cas, je viens d'un milieu qui n'était pas très diversifié, là. Mais ça m'a vraiment aidé à développer mes compétences interculturelles. Et puis, ça, c'est quelque chose qui m'a tellement bien servi dans ma vie et qui continue à me servir aujourd'hui. Alors, ça a changé ma vie.
Merci, Caroline, parce que c'est un peu différent parce qu'il y a des programmes au début qui avaient la partie qui est au Canada. C'est donné-nous la chance aussi de voir qu'il y a beaucoup de différences dans notre propre pays aussi.
Tout à fait, tout à fait.
Merci beaucoup. And I asked Carolyn to do that in French because we were at the beginning when we started this, we didn't have a translator, but we're so lucky tonight to have a translator. And I just wanted to thank Patricia for doing this for us as well tonight. So the second part. So the second part, we're going to bring up Ellie and Carolyn to help us with this one. It's a question and a follow-up question. So I'll start with Carolyn because she's on the screen right now. And the question is just to talk about the structure that you mentioned earlier and how that format that you participated in and what worked well about it and what didn't work well about it.
Okay, so I think that for me, one of the most fantastic aspects of the program was to get to know another part of Canada. This, I think, was really essential. So the ability to build a relationship with our Sri Lankan counterparts while we were in Canada in order to just get a better understanding of Sri Lanka and its Sri Lankan culture before we went overseas. I think that was a real bonus. It was and so I think it probably made the program a lot easier for us. Who, we had the home advantage, I want to say, but I think that's really one of the fantastic parts. I think the most difficult part was, leaving Sri Lanka at the end and kind of being ripped apart. It really felt that way, being kind of torn apart as a team and as a group. And then coming home to Canada in the middle of winter, and although it just seemed like a low note to end the program. So those are, I think, my main points. What about you, Ellie?
Yeah, a lot of that resonates with me as well, Caroline. I think the basic structure, the basic model is really solid, and I had a similar experience of being based in Ontario first with my counterpart and then going to Ecuador. And the basic structure really worked very well, having time with a counterpart, having time in a group, and then having time in a broader group, having time working in local community and then working overseas in a very different context. All of those elements, I think, worked really, really well. I also think the emphasis on, although we laughed about having a game at the beginning, all of those tools and fun ways of being able to communicate really difficult issues, I've taken with me throughout my life. And maybe some of the games or ways have changed, but just that exposure to educating ourselves in a way that's accessible across cultures was really, really great. And just that energy and hope and drive of bringing young people together is a really, really positive model. The two things that I would say on the downside, and I would imagine that that's changed over time, but when I think about where we were in Ecuador, living with Indigenous communities, there was very little said about our Canadian context and the Indigenous context of Canada and the connection with, what we were seeing with Indigenous people in Ecuador. And that's really come to a head recently with our own truth and reconciliation process, but that was very much missing from the program. And the other thing, which is similar to what you said, Caroline, about just feeling adrift at the end, I think Canada World Youth did a really good job throughout the program processing what was going on, but at the end, you are kind of left adrift and not left with many tools that help you around mental health, just helping you. You could debrief with others who had experienced the experience, but just helping you reintegrate into your own culture and your own context was challenging. We started the program in a beautiful natural setting in Parry Sound, and we ended the program downtown Toronto in the Eaton Centre. So I think we could do a better job at giving participants the tools to be able to process what they've experienced.
Great. And maybe just an add-on question as listening to both of your experiences, which is very much a development or transformation of a person. And then how that ties to mental health and a culture shock, even though it's your own country, is interesting as well. But is there a link of developing somebody in an international context that relates to international development?
Are you about to say something, Caroline?
No, go ahead.
If I understand the question, Susan, you're saying, is part of the program developing somebody to be able to work in global development?
Sure, if that's the way you perceive that question, sure, yeah.
Because I think, and it's kind of tied to the global issues of our time, and I think the key issue that faces youth today, and I mean the state of the World Children Report just came out from the UN, and it's all about mental health. And no matter where you live around the world and in Canada, we think about the big global issues being things like climate and inequality and poverty and conflict, and recently COVID. But underpinning in all of those issues is just what that means for young people in particular around their anxiety and depression and fear and just being overwhelmed. So I think that Canada World Youth does a relatively good job through the program around cross-cultural communication. I think we've really changed over time, and we've got this, this new emphasis on diversity and inclusion. With diversity comes conflict. With diversity and inclusion, we need tools to help us know how to manage conflict, how to communicate across cultures. And it's not just cross-cultural communication, it's really addressing diversity and inclusion. And I think we could do a much better job, and I think we would attract people to the program being able to offer This is a program that's going to give you tools and practices to help you grow in self-awareness, to grow in, giving you good, strong mental health practices, and to grow in the knowledge of how to deal with conflict management, for example. And that all leads to good work in the global development world. If that answers your question.
Yeah, and answers many more of my questions. so thanks for addressing that. Maybe just a few last words from Carolyn, and how about a format that you participated in, how it would work with young people today?
Well, I don't think that the format that,
no, it's good.
The format as I lived it at the time, pre-internet, in the time that, we had no cell phones, no texting, no WhatsApp, and no Facebook, was, that was a big part of my learning, how to be away from home, how to be, how to kind of make friends with the people who are close to me, how to nonetheless stay in touch, but under pretty difficult circumstances. So I don't think the format that I lived through applies. But one thing I would say is that I think the true value added of Canada World Youth was to give people, give me an experience of international issues. I think a lot of course, I think today's young people are 6 million times more aware than I was of international issues in general. They're more educated, they have more information at their fingertips, and probably they're much more well-versed than I was at the time. So it's a completely different situation. But I think that what remains true and valid is that having an experience of working and creating something and living with young people and with families of another culture is really irreplaceable. And that, I think, is, it kind of leads to some of the important building blocks that Ellie was mentioning, like the awareness of international issues, the ability to navigate issues across cultures and so on and so forth. So, and I think that is an important precursor for the kind of global development or movements that we need to solve today's problems.
Yeah, thank you for that. I couldn't agree more. We're going to move on to the next question. And I'm going to bring Chris, Paul, and we're going to leave Ellie here. So we'll talk to you very soon, Carolyn. So the next question, if you can bring Paul and Chris in. And I'll start with Paul. There he is. Hi, Paul.
Hello.
So Paul, I think Carolyn and Ellie started to touch on it, but what are some of the biggest issues that you see facing youth today?
Well, we're spending this time together just a few days before COP in Glasgow, and of course the global climate challenge is before us all. And those of us who have benefited from Canada World Youth and are of a certain generation have some responsibility for work that was not done. And so we've left a very big task ahead to those that follow. That's one of the reasons it's so important that we equip the next generation with the tools they need to be able to meet that big challenge. Ellie mentioned the State of the Children report. And again, while there's been huge progress in any number of indicators, there are still persistent challenges around access to food, access to health, access to education. And so those are big challenges that young people around the world are facing. And those are big issues that young Canadians can learn more about and can do something about. One of the things I really appreciated about Canada World Youth as a model is that it helps motivate people and give them agency and give them the tools to apply themselves on issues of concern to them. And sometimes they are the big global challenges working through multilateral organizations. Sometimes they're the very same issues on our street corners, on our own blocks. And I think the program also helps make those connections and helps people see the connections from the local to the global. If I can, I'm going to add one more, and I'm going to challenge Carolyn a little bit, because One of the concerns I have is that Canadians are still feeling comfortably cosmopolitan, that we are actually globally aware and globally open-minded. But in the work I do during the day, the evidence shows that Canadian students are amongst the least mobile internationally.
Yeah.
Americans travel abroad. American young people have more international experiences. British young people, German young people, French young people, Australian young people. And so this is a plea for scale. It's also a plea for recognizing that programs like Canada World Youth and like World University Service of Canada and others offer opportunities that are critically important to open the eyes of young Canadians, open the eyes of their supporting communities, and engage them and empower them to take on those big challenges the world is facing.
Yeah, thank you for that. Carolyn, did you wanna talk to that? No? Good.
Okay.
Can I ask Julien to
It was
bring
a friendly challenge. That's the way we do it in Canada World Youth. Just friendly challenge.
I accept the challenge. And next question. Ellie, thanks for joining us back on the panel. Since the onset of COVID, how do you think the international sector has been impacted, the international development sector?
Wow, great question. I can think of in three main ways. Initially, we were faced with many in the sector not being able to do their work, like being physically blocked from doing their work because access was so difficult. I'm currently working with the United Nations World Food Program, and we ended up, as commercial airlines went down or weren't able to fly, we provided the logistics backbone to the humanitarian community so that people could get access to the communities and to do the work that their organizations have a mandate to do. But that took a lot of effort, and many had to pivot and change how they were engaged, especially in local community development work. The second big issue impact was around the whole supply chain. Huge blocks in supply chain, a lot of negotiations between countries around access for goods and services across borders. So supply chain was another big one that comes to mind. And then the third one, just the impact it has on equality. When we think about vaccines and who's getting vaccines and who's not getting vaccines.
Yeah.
At the beginning, you know, we talked about, oh, we're all in this together. We're all facing this big storm together. But we truly aren't all on the same boat, as my wonderful husband often says. And so it really has exacerbated global inequality.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ellie, and I couldn't agree more. And so I'm going to bring Paul back on the screen, and Chris as well, because I want to tie those two questions together. So we know, you know, we've identified lots of issues facing young people today. We've identified bigger issues that have, or bigger discrepancy between issues that we've been dealing with globally. So as an alumnus of Canada World Youth, Chris, what role do you believe that Canada World Youth should be playing in the future of international development?
So I think there are not enough kind of platforms, programs, opportunities that connect people in Canada with one another and people in Canada with counterparts globally. Particularly, I think platforms, opportunities, programs that connect more marginalized Canadians that have perhaps a little bit less privilege than others. And so the ability to connect those people with one another and with others in Canada and globally, I think is a critical role that Canada World Youth can create. I think there's similarly a piece around creating opportunities for those who are less disadvantaged to understand the contexts of those who are more so in Canada and globally. I think the kind of the model that we've had renewed in different ways moving forward of peer-to-peer learning, learning with one's peers in Canada and globally is also a great way of doing all of that. I think there is, there's opportunities to do that in new ways than we have done in the past. And I think it speaks to kind of the digital technologies that we now have that create new opportunities that in and of themselves, I don't think are sufficient, but create, I think, interesting opportunities for blended ways of experiential learning that Canada World Youth could play a really critical role on. In the past, we always had a diversity of Canadians and a diversity of counterparts in other countries participating in the program. But that piece around greater inclusion and diversity, I think, is something that is critical to kind of our vision of ourselves and our vision of the world that we want to create. And Canada World Youth could play a really great role in all of that.
Yeah, and the peer-to-peer learning part is something that I think when we look at programming as well, that's something that's transformative in how the way we learn. So most of our learning up until that point is adult to peer. So yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. Before we move to the next question, maybe we can bring Ellie and Paul back in to see if they have any further comments with respect to Canada World Youth in a role that can play and some of the issues that young people are facing today.
I'll jump in here if I may and just say that one of the ironies of all the great advances of the internet and social media is that we've never been more connected, but at the same time we've never been more isolated. And that's something that young people are feeling. Particularly through the pandemic as they try to continue their studies or find work through the pandemic. So the connective tissue that Canada World Youth builds is really important. And as you think about the framing of Canada World Youth, I think it's always been a challenge to say you're going to get direct development results from the work of Canada World Youth against an RBM framework. And similarly, I don't think the expectation should be that participants end up in international development. What we want are active and engaged citizens who are deeply embedded in their communities and committed to moving issues forward right across the country. And so a number of us have had the privilege of being involved in international development over the years, but that's not the only measure of success of the program. I guess the other observation I would make around the question of alumni and alumni engagement would be to pick up again on something Lily said, the opportunity for alumni to play a connecting role. I mean, we're now 30, 40 years past our experience, but there's nothing more energizing than speaking to a recent past participant and trying to help them in their next steps. And so I mean, there are a number of us online today, not beyond the panel, who I know would be more than happy to connect virtually or in other ways to give a hand up to those that are just experiencing the program for the first time.
What a great idea. Thank you, Paul. So we're going to move to the next question. They were just flying by with these questions. The next question I'm going to ask Carolyn to join us back in the panel, and Paul, you can stay right where you are. And this is a two-part question. So looking at our Canada World Youth pillars, and there are 4 of them. There's experience and empowerment and experience for Indigenous communities, sustainable livelihoods and entrepreneurship, empowerment of young women and girls, and finally, environmental sustainability. It'll come out. Which one speaks to you more, and how should CWY be participating to advance youth participation?
Vas-y, Carolyn.
Okay, so
He was quick to throw it to you, Carolyn.
Yeah, I know. But okay, so I know you told us to choose one pillar, but I just wanted to say how it's almost impossible. I view the 4 pillars as a kind of a, I mean, very, very complementary and of course cross-cutting. So it's a bit difficult. But if I have to choose one, I think it's the environmental sustainability pillar. I mean, we've already mentioned that there's, I perceive that climate change and all the consequences of climate change is, it's the #1 issue facing the world today. It has impacts on all of us. It's very fundamental, it's life altering, it's already having consequences on people's livelihoods and living environments. And, you know, I think there's a lot of information out there on climate change, and I think there's a lot of awareness among young people, at least among the young people that that I know. And but I think it's really amazing if we can provide opportunities for people to do something practical with this to address the problem. And so I think there's an opportunity to understand the issue with an international lens. So that's amazing, because it's going outside our own backyard and composting and you know, whatever we might be doing in our very localized area. And it provides opportunities to kind of understand the far-reaching consequences of climate change for people who depend on the land. And so this, I think, is also a nod to the Indigenous aspect of this, of your work. But I think the greatest opportunity is to empower people and to enable people to actually try things, you know, to develop solutions, to carry out actions and ideas that can have an impact on this. But the idea, I think, is not so much to be attached to having a concrete outcome on the environment. I think the important thing is to enable and allow a space for people to experiment, to try things and probably maybe fail, but doing so to develop relationships with people and to develop leadership skills. And I think this is the kind of boost that we would need at a huge scale to enable the transformative change that is needed now and in the future to address our problems.
Let me pick up on what Carolyn was just saying. Again, I commend Canada World Youth for finding 4 pillars or 4 threads that are woven together. I know how challenging it is to get a large group of people to agree that we're going to go on these 3 priorities. And so it's terrific that you got to that point. And as Carolyn was saying, they are mutually reinforcing, which is really important. And so there's great transversal impact of that. If I were to pick one, and you asked me to pick one, I would look at sustainable livelihoods and entrepreneurship. I say that as a little bit out of character, out of type. But as we think about equipping the next generation and giving them strength, it's enabling them to find ways of having a full and active life that includes earning an income and making a contribution to the community. I just reflect on my own experience 40 years ago. My Canadian placement was in a small auto repair shop where I got to meet with people who are struggling to meet payroll, concerned about overregulation and taxes. And that has stayed with me for 40 years whenever we're thinking about great designs of social policy or great ways the government could do something. That this country is built by small and medium enterprises, and that's what fuels the prosperity for the country. So how we encourage and enable young people to think positively about ways they can engage in the economy in a meaningful way, in addition to the important social changes we need. I guess the other point I would make is that, and really this has developed so much since we were participants, the whole field of social entrepreneurship and how you can take powerful ideas in a social context and drive transformative change. So if I had to pick one, I'd look at sustainable livelihoods and entrepreneurship.
And in fact, in saying that, you know, livelihoods could be a cross-cutting theme between all of those, as would be women and girls, and as would be including empowering Indigenous communities. So yeah, and it's interesting that you say, I'm going to tie something that Carolyn said to what Paul said when you're talking about, you know, not tying it directly to outcomes, but experiences. So who would have thought when designing a program that 40 years later, the director of Universities Canada would say the thing that stuck with him was working about in an auto repair and talking to the owners about what their worries were. That would have never come into any design of any program 40 years ago. I'm pretty sure of it. And so it's interesting. And I don't want to move on to this question because I find it's vitally important. And maybe just a minute or two from Ellie and Chris if they'd like to weigh in as well.
Sure. I guess my preferences, which also reflect kind of the work that I do at WUSC, is around the livelihoods, entrepreneurship, sustainability, climate adaptation piece. I think the issue of Indigenous communities is a really great overlap, aligns well with that focus as well. So I think there's something really interesting there, or thinking about young women as climate entrepreneurs and the kind of work that can be done in that context, both with young women in Canada and young women kind of globally. So I think it's a really interesting space. There's a nexus there of these issues that is worthwhile exploring.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I have so many more questions, but I know that that the audience is going to get a chance to ask a few questions, and I don't want to take so much more of their time. But Ellie, if you have a few words, you can say that. But I'm going to leave Chris here as well, because the next question is for Ellie and Chris.
I would just not play fair, and I would say that I can't choose one of those four because I do think they're interlinked. And I think what Canada World Youth could focus on is not so much, what is the priority of those four priorities or what stage you're going to do them in, but more the approach. So what Caroline said about, an international lens to it. I think also this whole question of what is the outcome of such a program. It's really about, building resilience among youth to tackle the big issues of the day in those four pillars, without fear and without anxiety and without depression, giving them tools and skills that give them the confidence and the hope and this, the self-awareness and the courage to work together to make change.
Great, thank you, Ellie. And I made a little mistake when I said the next question is for you, so I'm going to give you a little breather. It's actually for Paul and Chris. Now bring you back in, Paul and Chris. And we touched on it a little bit earlier, but I want to touch on it a little bit more. We talked about, technologies and how they're playing a role, and especially how they played a role in the last year and a half of our lives. And my opinion is that, the vulnerable communities did not really have much access. But what are your thoughts on technologies like Zoom and social media and how they have affected our communities, our communication, and moreover, experiential learning?
Well, we have an interesting example in my organization. So since 1948, we've had an annual international seminar where Canadians get together with counterparts from another country and explore a global challenge together. And it's been one of the most kind of important things that we do as an organization, and it's always been in person. Well, this year we were not able to do it in person, so we had our first virtual international seminar, and it happened to be on women, climate change, and entrepreneurship. And so we had these young women entrepreneurs participating virtually with one another in Canada and from 7 other countries around the globe. And I actually think it was one of the best international seminars we've had, or one of the best we've had in recent memory. That the quality of the kind of the interaction and learning was significant. But I think what was important there is it's not just Zoom. It's actually thinking about those technologies and the methodologies that you need to kind of engage and engender the kind of learning that can happen when a group of people come together. And it's also not a cheap way of in having experiential learning. It should not be looked at in that regard, because I think to make it work well, you need to invest significantly. I would say, though, it has its costs. And it's, as I said before, I don't think it's sufficient. It can be really good, but I think it can be really good if it's also complemented by more face-to-face interaction with one another. more group dynamics that happen when you're actually with people and experiencing things in the same room, in the same community, on the same street with one another.
Yeah.
But I see potential.
Yeah, I tend to
jump in here
agree.
if I
How
may,
do you feel, Paul?
I'll jump in here if I may, and I concur
may.
with everything. I concur with everything that Chris has said. Just in my own experience in the university sector, when the pandemic first struck, Canadian universities moved 1.4 million learners online in 10 days. University of Toronto put 3,000 courses online in 72 hours. And if the pandemic had only lasted 6 weeks, people would say, the future is digital. It's all social. We can do it remotely from our basements. But anyone who has a young person in their life knows that they're desperate to get back to campus. If you are a young person, you want to get back to face-to-face learning. So there have been huge advances with the development of distance learning and new technologies. But they supplement and complement the opportunities of face-to-face experiential learning. I think the other observation I would make around the whole question of social media is that they came onto the world with such great promise. But what we've seen in place after place after place is that they drive polarization. They don't actually build community. And so we've got to be really cautious about relying on social media for building community. And the third thing I would say is that certainly in my own experience, I've found that new technologies are great for maintaining relationships. They're hard for establishing and deepening relationships. And so when you think about the very methodology and pedagogy of Canada World Youth, it is about the quality of the relationship. And so perhaps for pre-departure orientations, for re-entry orientations, and for maintaining linkages with your overseas partners, there are opportunities. But I'd be happy to join you in any efforts to encourage that there continue to be face-to-face, high-quality engagement through models like Canada World Youth.
Thank you. I'm looking at my time and I've run out of time to ask questions, and I want to make sure that the audience does have time to ask some questions. I'm going to ask Julian just to open. Do we have questions from the group?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to mention a couple of people had identified themselves. So I just wanted to mention quickly, we have Michelle, who said she did BC, India in 85-86, Ian, who did PEI Bolivia 85-86, Allison, Ontario, Sri Lanka 85-86, Eleanor, Sri Lanka 80-81. We've got Dawn, who did Quebec, Newfoundland, Senegal 75-76. So welcome to everybody. It looks like we've got quite a crowd listening in.
Nice representation.
And we do have some questions coming in here. Gunny asks to the group, anybody who wants to take this, I'm curious how you all describe your experience with Canada World Youth so many years later. How do you reflect on it?
Who wants to take that question?
Oh, I can start.
Awesome, go.
So many years later, I think that's the key word. For me, it's many decades later. And I reflect on my experience as, of course, as I said, it changed my life. But also, I just can't, it's woven, like it's woven into the person that I am. I still, I still do things that I learned to do when I was in Canada World Youth. I still use tools that I picked up also when I was in Canada World Youth, including a hoe that I brought back. And I still think and continue to challenge my own ideas. And so those are for me legacies of my Canada World Youth experience. And yeah, I wouldn't be the person I am today without that experience.
Yeah, thank you for that. I feel the same way.
And
I would come in here and just say that Ellie and I have three young men as sons. And when I think of the things we did as participants, whether it was riding on the rooftops of buses or breaking away from the group.
Gosh.
Oh, exactly.
What?
I mean, I don't know how Canada World
That
Youth
didn't
does risk
happen on
mitigation.
mine.
You can strike it from the record, but I don't know how Canada World Youth does risk mitigation these days. It was a different era, but those were the adventures that were before us as young people, and they gave us that sense of trying new things, and that stayed with us.
So the way in which I would reflect on it is that there are issues, there are personal challenges, there are interactions that I had from the experience both in Canada and globally that I'm still processing. Like I still think about, and I think, oh yeah, you know, I'm thinking about that issue once again, and it's like, yeah, that now I know a little bit more that I would have reacted differently, or I think about an issue as slightly different than I did at that time, or that time kind of influences how I think about an issue today. So it still becomes a way in which I'm still processing that experience. And not only that experience, you know, other experiences in my life, but that is certainly a foundational one that continues to inform my thinking about so many issues.
Yeah, insightful. Thank you.
And we've got two other alumni that have messaged in. We've got Margaret, who said she did Indonesia, Nova Scotia in '76. We've got Megan, who did Nova Scotia, Indonesia, 2009, 2010. And then we've got some questions for Susan. I know everybody else has been answering some questions, but I've got two for you, Susan.
Those are part of the deal.
The first one is Canada World Youth Core program has changed significantly, notwithstanding the effects of the pandemic. So I'm wondering if there are plans to bring back the youth exchange in the future, kind of the 6-month 3-in-3 program. And the second one is, what advice would you give to Canada World Youth alumni whose dream is to work for Canada World Youth?
So first question is are there plans right now to bring back the traditional exchange?
That's right.
So I will say there are no plans to bring back the traditional exchange, but never say never. I tend to have the same feeling as Carolyn. The world has changed quite significantly since some of these programs have taken place, and some of the needs have changed significantly. And as a lot of the panelists talked about tonight, there's definitely a role for Canada World Youth to play. And the formatting is great as well. And I think there's some kind of mix of what we can do, but the traditional format itself, oh, look, they've joined each other. Nice
the failures of Zoom, we've come together.
But that's the answer. There have been no plans, and never say never is the way I look at it. But for the moment, no. And what was the second question?
The second question was, what advice would you give to Canada World Youth alumni whose dream is to work for Canada World Youth one day?
I would tell them to call me. It's just as simple as that. Once you're a part of Canada World Youth, I think you have that connection forever. And I didn't do my program with the 4 panelists, but I feel that we share some of the same values because of those experiences. And I didn't bring back a hoe, and I didn't find my life partner there, but a lot of the stories they tell resonate with me because I have that same experience. So they're family.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. And then maybe one last question for the panelists. Gunny asks, have your groups had reunions?
What was the question? Sorry.
If your groups have had reunions, have you had any reunions with your cohort?
We had a 25th year anniversary, and we pulled much of our Canadian team together, one of whom's online, Frank Grimard, who was in the 82-83 Nova Scotia, Sri Lanka exchange with me. And it was actually great. And it was really familiar to see people who we had been together 25 years ago and still kind of had this connection with one another. And the ability to kind of track each other's lives over that time period was really wonderful. I'm looking forward to doing it again, maybe at 45 years, because we're at about 40 years now.
We invited people into our home here about 15 years ago.
A little longer, almost 20.
Ah!
Yeah.
20, wow.
It was great. It was from the whole team, so not just our group. And a number of them are still involved in our lives, and it's really fun to catch up. And also, as Chris was saying, to meet children and see the next generation take up the values and actions that we so gloriously took on all those years ago.
Mhm.
So the answer to the question is, yeah, you
Yes.
don't have regular reunions, but you keep in touch with your counterparts from time to time. And you know, again, that's a good thing about social media. We have a Facebook group for my group, and we get on every now and then. And I think we found each other again through that, and we're all spread out over different parts of the world. And so I'm a little bit younger than the group here. Our 25th birthday is coming up next year.
Facebook thing you speak of, Susan?
So our 25 years coming up next year. So
That's right. It'll be 40 years next September for us. And so I don't know if I've mentioned it to Ellie, but I think we better get planning and finding some time next September to gather the folks at 40
Yeah,
years.
40 years. It's true.
Wow. Incredible, incredible. And we've reached our time, and I think this has been enlightening, inspiring. I cannot thank you enough for accepting to do this. And just your thoughts and opinions and your expertise from the fields that you currently work in that also very much overlap. And Carolyn mentioned to me she didn't work in international development, but I think in a way you kind of still do. And yeah, you're not touching necessarily those issues, but you're taking those transferable skills, and I think they work in a global footprint. So I thank you for sharing that as well. We're going to continue with this series for the 50 years of Canada World Youth, because it is our 50th birthday, and I feel like we can stretch it out over an entire year, because the organization was incorporated in 1971, but the first exchange didn't take place until 72. So we can have a lot of fun with this, and we're going to touch on some other issues. We're going to have young people, and it's going to be in French and English. It's going to be as diversified as we can possibly make it, and try to touch on some of the points that you have suggested today, and talk to them, to young people, about the way they feel about it. And so we'll get some interesting and different perspectives as well. So thanks for setting the stage. If anybody has any kind of question, alumni, we do have alumni at CWY-JCM.org, and we can take any questions there. I know there's some alumni that have gotten in touch with me that are having specific reunions. If there's any way that we can help and try to find any information that you're looking for, we'll certainly oblige to do so. I think at the end of the day, someone asks me what the objective is of this call is, and it's always to make sure that youth are involved in decisions that affect their future. And so that's point final for me. And I thank you for participating in that as well. And it's peer-to-peer, it's adult to peer, it's Canada internationally, and it's Canada within Canada. A person is a person, and we're the people that make those decisions. So thank you again. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our participants, and I wish you all a beautiful evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Merci. Merci.